Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo. I am the director of the DEED Lab at Parsons School of Design and delighted to welcome you to the kickoff of our study group with 200 million artisans called The Business of Handmade. I was joking a few minutes ago, I was delighted that my partner Priya was okay with not organizing just one event, but in fact doing three. And the reason for that is because in our case studies initiative in the DEED Lab, we know how difficult, time consuming and challenging it is to develop thorough case studies and case stories of what is happening in the artisan community across the world. And we were so impressed, delighted to join as knowledge partners in the business of handmade research. And in the spirit of education, wanted to make sure we were giving this research enough time to be able to understand it and explore it through three lenses. Before I hand it over to Priya, I want to honor, in the spirit of Native Heritage Month here in the United States, want to acknowledge the indigenous communities with whom we have been doing a lot of our work in the DEED Lab. They are many of the most affected communities around the world, and especially in the artisan sector. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you, mostly people in the Americas and in Europe, to perhaps explore whose land you may be on right now. I'm joining you from Brooklyn, which is the ancestral lands of the Lenape and Canarsie people. So with that, I will hand it over to Priya Krishnamoorthy, founder of 200 Million Artisans, to kick off today's event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you everyone for joining in. We know a lot of friends are in the audience, so I'm really grateful for your time. Really happy to bring this this amazing panel together, people whom I've admired from for a very long time, and to really be part of a conversation which I think is much needed and more than relevant at this point. Briefly, I'm Priya Krishnamoorthy. I'm the founder and CEO at 200 Million Artisans. We call ourselves an ecosystem enabler, really committed to reimagining the potential of the handcrafted. We do this by bridging gaps in knowledge, resources, and partnerships for artisan producers and impact enterprises with the goal to support their sustainable growth in the long run. Today's conversation is part of three such study group conversations, and this is our experts and our the people who are part of the panel today probably know more about this than I can ever sort of attempt to contribute. So really to put this in a nutshell, there has been a lot of conversation really about how do we work with artisan communities? Who owns the IP? Who owns the cultural intellectual property? Who owns the designs? These are questions that have come up over and over again. And this is not a challenge alone for artisan communities alone, but even as designers, as enterprises, where do we draw the line and what are the boundaries? And these are some questions that have started coming up over and again. And of course, all these have happened for many years, but does that mean that we continue to let it happen? And what does it mean when we talk about copyright? What does it mean when we talk about creative and cultural knowledge that has been passed down for generations, orally perhaps? And just because it's not documented, does that mean that all of us have the right to use it the way we want it? So this is really, in a nutshell, what we're trying to, we are going to attempt to unravel and unearth. And I'm excited to introduce the panel without any further ado. I'll start with Monica Bota-Morsin. Monica is a lawyer for the cultural intellectual property. She is one of the pioneers of this conversation in fashion, and she is also the founder of the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative, where she's working on a framework to preserve traditional cultural expressions and build bridges between traditional artisans and the fashion industry. We are also joined by Meera Goradia. Meera is the co-founder of Creative Dignity, one of our long-term partners. She's also one of the advisors on Business of Handmade. Creative Dignity is a volunteer-led movement spread across India, actively working on relief, rehabilitation, and rejuvenation within the craft sector and through and post-COVID. Previously, she was also the director of Khameer, a premier organization for creative and cultural industries in Kutch, which, under her able guidance, has developed very innovative approaches in the artisan sector. Um, we have Karthik Vaidyanathan, whose case study was part of Business of Handmade. He is the founder of Varnam Craft Collective. Karthik has had no formal training in design, but has always been passionate about Indian crafts. He was fascinated with the colorful toys of Channapatna and would travel to Channapatna, which is in the south of India, over weekends and holidays. And a few visits later, designs of Varnam really saw the light of day. Karthik's contribution is also very interesting because he's been a big champion of reviving and revitalizing traditional craft through design, but he's also been very vocal about co-creation and cultural intellectual property, both of artisans as well as designers such as themselves. And last but not the least, I'm really, really excited to welcome Dayalal Kudecha and his son Dilip Kudecha, who are artisan designers, who call themselves artisan designers, and are artisan entrepreneurs from Kutch, which is in the west of India. Dayalalji belongs to a traditional weaver's family. Having trained as a master weaver, he's been weaving traditional and contemporary designs for over 25 years. He's also completed a year-long design course from Kala Raksha Vidyalaya, which was one of the first design schools really for artisans and artisan entrepreneurs, and learn to innovate and experiment with his designs and even vocalize their importance in contemporary ways. He now owns a design label called Four Line, and he runs it with his wife and son Dilip. Dilip is also joining us today. And today, Dayalalji wears multiple hats. He's part of the faculty at the Somaya Kala Vidya, which is again an entrepreneurship school for artisans, where he's helped forged a very highly effective partnership with weavers from Karnataka. He's represented weavers at international conferences and continues to champion the craft. Thank you so much for all of you for being here. Now I'll hand over the stage to Cynthia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Priya. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for you all for being here. And I neglected to say Happy New Year to those of us in India. Happy Diwali. Thank you so much for sharing this very special time with us. In the spirit of, again, this is a study group. So the idea is that we are a community of learners here. We have students, we have faculty colleagues, we have designers, entrepreneurs, we have artisans, researchers. And so every experienced faculty member knows that we're not sure who did the reading and who didn't. So we have to make sure to show up with a set of questions. So I have a set of questions. I'm going to pose them to our esteemed panelists. And I encourage those of you who are in the audience at any point in time, if you have any questions, if you have questions now, please add them to the chat so that I can help guide the conversation and address what you may be interested in learning in today's talk. So the DEED Lab organized an event a few months ago called Artisan versus Designer, the Power in a Label. And we've been quite preoccupied with these notions of artisans and designers working together, sometimes in mutually beneficial ways, sometimes in exploitative ways. We're interested in the question, is co-design true, horizontal, participatory, and co-design actually possible? And that was one of the drivers of today's focus. And it's something that comes up throughout the Business of Handmade report. So I wanted to kick off the conversation with a question for Dayalal and Dilip, which is, you are artisans, artisan designers. Would love for you to share with us a bit more, what is your relationship with your craft? And as you currently see the system of designers and artisans, what do you think may be missing from that relationship between artisans and designers? Would love to hear your perspective on what may be missing from the artisan designer system. And also, we can introduce the theme of cultural intellectual property. Where do you think that that may fit in? How have you navigated it in your own enterprise?
Right. Yeah, so thanks for that. Firstly, actually, Cynthia, I don't come from a design background. So I often use that to my advantage because not all the artisans always have a good working relationship with designers, because often, am I audible? Yeah, okay. Often, like for example, when I started around 10 years ago, the artisans were not very forthcoming to work with me because they thought I was a designer. And when they realized that I wasn't, and that I wasn't in it to, because often what happens with designers that I have also seen is designers are restless creatures, right? And what happens is when they have done something with one craft, they want to move on to another craft and another craft. So they want to work with multiple crafts and constantly exploring from their point of view. Does that always work for an artisan? In my opinion and in my experience, I haven't seen it work. I was very clear that I wanted to focus on crafts of a certain region in India, which I felt wasn't being represented, because in India, most of the craft representation, whether in India or abroad, is from the West or the North. From the South, the representation of crafts is often very limited. And I wanted to work in the crafts in South India, but also I wanted to keep in mind that I wanted it not to be a one-time, but something that we continue to work and keep it sustainable. And the biggest challenge with artisans is if the income is not sustainable, then they often move away and they will go on to a factory nearby or a tailoring unit, or they can become taxi drivers where the income is much better and more sustainable. Of course, until COVID came. So I was very clear from the beginning that whatever I did with them had to have a design intervention, but it had to be a long-term relationship, which is why at Varnam we constantly says that good design equals sustainable livelihoods. So it's not something that we do for a time being and then move on and then leave them high and dry, because they often get used to working with a certain designer and then they don't know how to move forward. So that's one aspect of it. So the artisans that have been with me since 10 years know that I'm there, and I'm not just there to design products, but I'm there to help them out in times of need. There have been cases where artisans have been exploited by the government, by the banks. There have been cases where artisans have been caught by the police and we've had to pull them out of stations. So it's a very, it's like an extended family, you know. So we really build relationships with them. And I'm sure most of the organizations who do that, they are, at the end of the day, become an extended family. So it becomes a relationship that goes on for over several years. The other thing is that for me, I was very clear that the craft had to be utilitarian. So when I looked at even our craft, Channapatna, it's a GI marked craft, and it's always known as Channapatna toys. So Channapatna and toys always went hand in hand. And I looked at it as the craft of Channapatna, not Channapatna toys. So which is why I felt that you could use the same skill and the craft to create products that went beyond toys. And I think that was an eye opener for a lot of people when we started working with it. And the artisans themselves started looking at the craft differently. So now when you go to Channapatna, you see a lot of units that are creating similar products. And I'm very happy that they are. The third thing which I started coming across is often most of the designers, when I joined the craft, who were working there, were very, they were not very keen to share the designs in the open domain for the fear of being copied or imitated. And I was very clear that I wanted the world to see what this craft could do. Since I didn't come from a design background, I didn't have those, it didn't strike me that, oh, this could be plagiarized or imitated, because what we were doing was very different from what the craft used to be. So there came a point when you would Google Channapatna and you would see all our products, and I was very okay with it. But I think there also started a process where a lot of designers and educated individuals started then plagiarizing and duplicating a lot of the designs that we created. So that's a constant struggle. I mean, that could be an entire, I don't know how much time we have, but that became the third part of the journey, wherein we realized where does the traditional craft end and where does the contemporary product design, which is unique to what we do, starts. And that's a struggle that we still face.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I love that framing that good design equals sustainable livelihoods. I feel like that's really a nugget that we can all take with us from today's session. And I want to maybe bring in Zara's question in the chat, which uses also that word sustainable. From your experience, Karthik, because you work so closely with the artisans with whom you know, with whom you've created your venture, do you think it's is it possible to have sustainable models where the designers are based abroad, working with artisans in the Indian subcontinent? Have you seen that? Do you think, as somebody who is there with the artisans, do you think that that kind of global relationship would lead towards that sustainability?
See, in my experience, and I mean, I hope I don't get butchered by if there are any designers on the group, but I think craft, you can't be a WhatsApp designer. I mean, that's what I believe in, Cynthia. Perhaps I'm very old school. You know, I don't want to be a WhatsApp designer. I mean, the process of sitting next to my, I have a unit where there are all women artisans. They're very young. And I look forward to sitting next to them, chatting with them, working with them. I mean, that's the beautiful part of working with a craft. There you have a human being who can be molded in many different ways because they are so skilled. The thought of sending them something on WhatsApp and mail and a drawing and asking them to do is very alien to me. And perhaps, and when I see a lot of design interns who work with us, they do so much of research. I see them doing clay modeling. I see them doing 3D views and sectional views and intersections. And I'm like, just keep it free flowing and just sit with the designer. And when I tell them that, they obviously look at me, perhaps saying, oh, but you don't come from a design school. So perhaps you don't know how we've been trained. And I really wish we need to unlearn the process of how we design and make it more natural, because some of my best designs have come when we've improvised at the lathe, you know. So I feel that it's great to have a starting point as a design from a designer, but I feel it's also important to have someone locally there. For example, when I came to Karnataka, I didn't know the local language, which is Kannada. And one of the artisans once told me that if you want to work with us, you need to know our language. And that really, I was in Bangalore for 6 years and I didn't make an effort to learn the language. I made it a point to learn the language within 6 months. It was broken, it was horrible, but that made a difference because they felt this is someone who wants to be with us. So there are little nuances like that where I feel that it's very important, even in design schools, when we work with artisans, is to be a part of their process. You know, so there has to be, I feel, a local person who can also handhold them. Because sometimes, a lot of the times, my designs, when they are on sketch and paper, when they are at the lathe, they turn out being something completely different most of the times. I mean, that's my opinion. I don't know how others feel about it. So.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's also activity in the chat. Encourage everyone to read and follow the links that we'll be sharing throughout the event. Meera, shall we try again with Dayalal and Dilip?
Yeah, I think they've come back.
Okay.
Dayalal, તમે વાત કો ગુજરાતીમાં અને હું પછી ટ્રાન્સલેટ કરી દઈશ.
હાજી. હા, તો એક ડિઝાઇનર આર્ટિઝન જે છે, સમય કલાવેદીથી અમે શીખ્યા તો ઘણા ડિઝાઇનરો સાથે ક્રોક્રિએશન કર્યું. એમાં ઘણા બધા ફાયદા કારીગરને થયા, પણ એમાં હજી આપણે જે ડિઝાઇનરને જે ક્રેડિટ મળવું જોઈએ, જે આર્ટિઝન ડિઝાઇનર છે, જે કારીગર છે, એટલું હજી ક્રેડિટ નથી મળતું. ઘણી વખત જે ડિઝાઇનરો છે એ મોટા મોટા ડિઝાઇનરો છે, કારીગરો પાસે કામ કરાવી લે છે, પરંતુ પછી એ ફાઇનલ પ્રોડક્ટ જ્યારે જાય છે ત્યારે જે મોટા લેબલ જે ડિઝાઇનરો છે એના નામે જ જાય છે. અને ક્યાંક ને ક્યાંક જે કારીગરની જે કળા છે કે કારીગરનું જે નામ છે એ ક્યાંક છૂટે છે. તો એ ન છૂટવું જોઈએ. કારીગરનું કોઈ પણ રીતે એનું નામ યા તો એમની વેબસાઇટ ઉપર એમનું જે કામ એ કારીગર કરે છે ડિઝાઇનર સાથે ક્રોક્રિએશન જે છે, તો બંનેનું જે ક્રેડિટ છે એ સરખું આવે તો સારું, એવું મારું વિચાર છે.
Diabai was talking about the co-design projects. At the school, we teach the artisans to be the designer, but he's talking about in a co-design situation. When the artisan and the designer work together in a co-design project, the artisan isn't given equal credit or sometimes not given credit. I think that's what is.
હાજી સમજ્યો નહીં હું એકવાર જરાક સમજાવી
જ્યારે
દઉં.
તમે ડિઝાઇનર સાથે કામ કરો
હાજી.
ડિઝાઇનમાં ઘણી વખત એક આર્ટિસ્ટનું નામ નીકળી જાય.
હા અહીં હું એ જ કીધું કે ઘણી વખત નીકળી જાય છે જે ન હોવું જોઈએ, કારીગરને પણ એટલું જ ક્રેડિટ મળવું જોઈએ. મેં એ જ કીધું કે કારણ કે ફાઇનલી જે પ્રોડક્ટ છે એ કારીગર બનાવે છે ને, ફાઇનલ જે પ્રોડક્ટ બને છે એ કારીગર બનાવે છે, તો કારીગરને પણ એટલું ક્રેડિટ મળવું જોઈએ છે. ઘણી વખત એ મિસ થઈ જાય છે કારીગરનું. તો કોઈ પણ રીતે મતલબ એમની વેબસાઇટ ઉપર કે કાંઈ પણ કારીગરનું જે છે નામ ક્યાંક ને ક્યાંક આવવું જોઈએ. એ કારીગરનું ઈચ્છે છે કારીગર, અને હોવું પણ જોઈએ કારણ કે ફાઇનલ પ્રોડક્ટ કારીગર પોતે બનાવે છે.
Yeah, okay. I understood it as two parts. I understood it as not getting the credit in a collaboration with the designer, or where there is a co-creation, and also not being recognized enough as artisan designers. So I read it like that, but maybe it is primarily about getting credit, getting due credit in the co-creative process.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much also, Judy, for jumping in, and Zara in the chat. So we're now crowdsourcing the translation, which is wonderful. And perhaps I would love also for you, Mira, to reflect on this point, which is, because we hear this a lot in the Deed Lab, and just even the fact that we feel the need to label the roles different from artisan than designer. Is something that preoccupies and really has been central to the research that we've been doing in the lab. And I guess I'm curious to hear your perspective, Mira, and based on your experiences, what is the role that the artisans play in the creation of the products? And perhaps we can add there the designing. Do they have an equal stakes as creators, or are they merely custodians of techniques that are then harnessed by designers or design houses?
Cynthia, so I think there's been a journey, definitely in the perception of an artisan just being, a maker and just reproducing designs given by a designer. I think there's been a shift and a journey from that to where we are today. And given the whole situation post-COVID, I was reading somewhere that we are moving very rapidly towards a new space of looking at craft, even where these boundaries between craft, design, and art are slowly going to blur, and what we're going to actually cull out at the end of it are going to be the core values that an artisan represents, or a designer represents, or an artist represents. And it would probably called, it's been labeled as something as neo-craft perhaps. And the search then would be more towards traceability, towards looking at certain purpose-driven products. It would be more towards finding value in the products that one is consuming. And I feel that that is the movement we are going to move towards, and where we are going to actually have to then work on refiguring the terms of engagement.
Thank you so much, Mira, for that. And I'd love to bring Monica in to the conversation and explore a bit the intellectual property side of this. Monica, I know you shared already some of this in the chat, but perhaps you could share in your work. It seems clear that conventional tools of intellectual property are not serving this conversation well, right? These issues of co-creation and credit. Perhaps you can share a bit more about that, and what do you see as the implications of intellectual property in co-creative models?
Thank you, Cynthia. I hope my connection is stable and you can actually hear me this time. The thing with conventional IP is that these tools were created for catalyzing and nurturing the industrial era, so to say. So conventional IP tools, from copyright, geographical indications, industrial design, patents, and so on, they were not created to protect and nurture traditional cultural expressions and traditional knowledge. Craft, we simplify when we say craft, because let's say the crafted product is the tangible object, a tangible traditional cultural expression. The knowledge that the custodian has acquired since childhood, usually in informal education system or a non-Western education system, if you want. Acquired knowledge, you don't have to be a designer. I mean, we called designers as a concept, came again once with the Industrial Revolution. Artisans are designers at the core. Those structures, the woven structures, have a design, right? So many creations that are made by artisans involve biomimicry, for example. We see patterns in nature that are expressed in these creations. So what Mira was saying about art, craft, like, well, this is and has always been one thing. I think I learned more in India than anywhere else in the world that craft has been, you know, the elevated as the kings and the most beautiful form of art. We've seen craftsmanship at a level that is, or I haven't ever seen anywhere in the world like I've seen in India. So that's not just art. I think it's the purest form of art, what craft can do. So when we talk about IP tools, we simplify the conversation very much, but we have to start a conversation somewhere because of the paradoxical situations that we ended up, I don't know, 300 years later, where these tools that were made to support a production, mass production, is now killing craft and handcraft production and livelihoods that are supported by the work of hands and spirit together. In one of the field studies I did in 2019 in Kutch, when I actually met Judy as well for the first time, I was inquiring the level of knowledge or how much of legal information reaches the artisans. And of course, it's something so far away from this narrative, because especially in India, for many, many, many years, the focus of the government and all the policies, or the majority of policies, has been on scaling production and kind of making everything as cheap as possible to export. So we have to look at this whole situation holistically: history, policies in the cultural context, different types of programs that people have been used to, you know, how are the different not diplomas, but there's people who are winning different competitions or are recognized at different degrees of mastership, and the same people are also involved in, or some of these people are also involved in commerce. So there's a lot of intersections there that kind of need to be untangled. When we created the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative, cultural intellectual property is not a term that is officially recognized anywhere. We created it to say we need a system that is equally powerful to the IP system, but the IP system nurtures corporations. We need a system that nurtures small-scale production, traditional knowledge, this idea of keeping knowledge alive for centuries, not always coming up with something new. Obviously, there's innovation in craft, there's innovation in education in craft. We see that in all these examples. Everyone who's part of this conversation is innovating in craft in a way or another, whether at, you know, transmission of knowledge level, whether at you know, the way we commercialize it, whether at the way it is, the designs are evolving, and so on. So when we said cultural intellectual property rights should be new construction, a new way to protect and nurture, to sustain this knowledge so that it doesn't die, and to sustain craft so that the people who live, and they just, it's not just living. I mean, none of the people that I interviewed at the time were saying craft is just livelihood for me. Livelihood was a byproduct always. It was important, obviously, but always it started, or all the answers started with, this I have inherited from my family. This is important. It was important for my father. It was important for my mother. It's generations. It was a God-given gift. All the Khatris that I met in Ajrakpur, in Kauda, in Damadka, right? They were all calling God in the equation, something that you don't usually see when you work with patents or trademarks. So it's definitely a different space, and we need to create tools to change terminology, to really reimagine a system. For that, at CIPRI, we created the 3 Cs rule, because the 3 Cs rule builds upon existing bits of legislation that support other areas that are more similar to craft than to the industrial production. So for example, I don't know if some of you might know about the 1992 Convention on Protecting Biodiversity. This convention also has a protocol to support its implementation. It's called the Nagoya Protocol. Now, the Nagoya Protocol refers to genetic resources and plant-based varieties and so on. A lot of these plants require traditional knowledge to be grown, to be harvested, to be transformed into teas, to be transformed into different types of condiments and so on. Now, for those type of resources, the Nagoya Protocol imposes the element of consent and the element of compensation. So you would see that even Lipton iced tea that harvests a lot of tea in Assam, for example, they have a benefit sharing agreement with communities there that are custodians of the teas and of the land. And so the same idea was, we have to create a similar model, but in the textile and product design space, because why should this space be empty and kind of a no man's land where everyone goes, taps into it, does whatever they want? So we said, let's have a starting point. And as we saw from the conversations earlier, credit was always a big part, a big point in the artisan designer relationship. So we put the credit in as well. And we said, consent, credit, and compensation should be the place where we start the conversation. If all designers learn this in school, I went to fashion school. That's how I got to India, because as a lawyer, I realized, you know, you can't really change law and talk to parliament about it. You have to go and understand how the industry works. So I went to fashion school and I studied textile value chain management. And during the field study research, I got to India for the first time. And then I kind of fell in love and stayed and came back to do more research. And probably, I think it would be a good research to do a study group with Cynthia and Priya next, because this is an amazing environment. So I realized at the fashion school that nobody had ever seen a loom before getting to the master's degree. So these were all fashion students in Europe that do not understand what craft is. And I knew, I ended up knowing more than many fashion designers knew, because it's just not, this is not part of the conversation. So when we say, why did they appropriate? Yes, we can blame people, but we also have to understand the system itself is designed in a way that is not promoting, nurturing, and sustaining the knowledge. Yeah. And I also observed in India something similar when we talk so much about, or in the fashion school, about design interventions. It's like the designer comes and intervenes. They have to intervene in craft. No, it should be a design co-creation. The words are important. Like Mira was saying, the words are very important. The ownership should be taken out of the conversation. They're not my artisans, your artisans. They are artisans, our partners, our collaborators. So we have to start small from kind of a basic level of a mutual understanding and respect, like Judy was saying in the chat earlier. Sorry for taking so much
Thank
space.
you, Monica. No worries at all. I'd love to just kind of ground this in a particular case, turn it to Mira. Perhaps if you could share more about your latest advocacy around the H&M and Sabyasachi collaboration. The key question is, many have felt that cultural intellectual property being appropriated isn't anything new. Why take up the issue now? And I'll drop the link in the chat for the letter if people haven't read it.
Okay, so actually the whole advocacy that we did using this incident that happened with Sabyasachi and H&M was really just that. We just wanted to flag the issue, to make it a flashpoint, to open up the Pandora's box, because in my opinion, far beyond any kind of issue that I saw in this particular controversy, I mean, there are much larger issues that face even designers, and that is the issue of mechanization, of mass technologies appropriating vocabularies and traditions so easily, and with no one, and one is not able to really pinpoint or blame anybody. They're able to get away with it time and again. There are a whole lot of people who sell fakes in the name of craft. So that is at one extreme. And what happened with Sabyasachi was at another extreme, because here you had a very, very sensitive designer who stood and represented the artisan sector. And then when he chose to use a technology that drew from the traditional, the traditional practice, but changed the technology totally in a way that did not include the artisans, we felt that, the design space where artisans and designers both need each other, where both of them are in the business of creating something original, authentic, is really the space where change can be housed. One really can't try to change or take on the big industry right now. It's a different level of problem that has gone on since the Industrial Revolution, so to speak. But at this level, at the designer artisan level, these are issues that can be flagged, that can be discussed, and that new ways of working and dealing with each other can be found, because both need each other. And that's why we felt it was very important to make this a talking point, so that in time, different stakeholders can really start unpacking all these issues and maybe come out with some understanding of what could be a advisable practice, or at least attempt to try and bring out some idea about what kind of best practices we could all design together.
Thank you so much. Great segue on this notion of best practice, and Karthik's use of the term WhatsApp designer has prompted some additional questions to me privately, and some in the chat. So I wanted to turn towards Dayalal and Dilip, if perhaps would love to hear your perspective on, in addition to the issue of credit, of receiving fair and shared credit, what may be some of the ways of working that an artisan would hope for from a designer? What are the ways that one can imagine building trust? What do artisans think need to change when we're looking at the relationships between designers, so that you're fairly recognized, but also to address some of the pain points that come up?
गुजराती में ट्रांसलेट करूं क्वेश्चन के समझ्या?
हाँ जी नहीं થોડોક અડધો સમજ્યા કે
Okay.
એવું સમજ્યા કે શું અપેક્ષાઓ છે ડિઝાઇનરો પાસે કારીગરોની, પણ પૂરો થોડુંક સમજાવો તો હું
હા કે થોડું તમે શું અપેક્ષા રાખો છો ને શું આમાં જે પણ જે તમે કહ્યું આ ક્રેડિટ નો પ્રોબ્લેમ છે કે કાઈ પણ જે બીજા પ્રોબ્લેમ તમારા હિસાબે એના માટે શું સોલ્યુશન શોધી શકાય, તમે શું વિચારો છો?
હા તો એના માટે કારણ કે ફાઇનલ પ્રોડક્ટ જેમાં આપણે વાત કરી કે કારીગર જ બનાવે છે, ફાઇનલ પ્રોડક્ટ જે માર્કેટમાં જાય છે, તો બંનેનું ક્રેડિટ હોવું જોઈએ, ડિઝાઇનર અને કારીગરને પણ એટલું જ ક્રેડિટ મળવું જોઈએ. એના માટે આપણે સોલ્યુશન એવું, કારણ કે કોક્રિએશન તો આપણને કરવું પડે, કારણ કે ડિઝાઇનર સાથે કામ કરવું છે. અને હમણાં આગળ જે બેન વાત કર્યા કે માસ પ્રોડક્શન થાય છે, અને આ ઇસ્યુ જ્યારે માસ પ્રોડક્શન બાજુ જ્યારે ડિઝાઇનરો જાય છે ત્યારે આ ઇસ્યુ બધા થાય છે. તો એક સોલ્યુશન એમ છે કે એની બે માર્કેટ હોવી જોઈએ. એક તો જે એવો ડિઝાઇનર એવું ડિઝાઇન કરે જેનું માર્ક્સ પ્રોડક્શન એ બધા માટે કરતા હોય તો એ બીજી માર્કેટ માટે કરે, અને જે લક્ઝરી જે બનતું હોય સારામાં સારું લક્ઝરી, તો એના માટે એક અલગ માર્કેટ છે એ ડિઝાઇનર છે એ ક્રિએટ કરે, કારણ કે માર્કેટમાં એમનું નામ છે. તો એવી ડિઝાઇન બનાવવી જોઈએ જે લક્ઝરી પ્રોડક્ટ છે, તો એ ક્રાફ્ટ સાથે કરવું પડે અને એ માર્ક્સ પ્રોડક્ટ બાજુ ન જવું જોઈએ. એક તો એ અમારી ઈચ્છા કારીગરની હોય, કારણ કે જે ક્રાફ્ટ છે એ માસ પ્રોડક્શનમાં તો શક્ય નથી જ્યારે આપણે લક્ઝરી કે આવી ડિઝાઇનર વાત કરતા હોઈએ. તો બે માર્કેટ હોવા જોઈએ એના અલગ અલગ, કારણ કે એક જે છે એવી ડિઝાઇન થાય કે જે માસ પ્રોડક્શન મશીન બાજુ એ થાય તો પ્રોબ્લેમ સોલ્વ થઈ શકે, અને એક માર્કેટ એવી હોવી જોઈએ જે લક્ઝરી પ્રોડક્ટ બને સારામાં સારા, અને એમાં બંનેને આર્ટિઝનને પણ બંને રીતે ફાયદો થાય, એમનું નામ પણ થાય અને એને ક્રેડિટ પણ પૂરેપૂરું મળે, અને એની જે વળતર છે એ પણ એમને પૂરેપૂરી મળી શકે. તો કારીગરનું એક તો નામ હોવું જોઈએ, ભલે પછી લેબલમાં હોય કે એ લોકો જ્યારે લોન્ચ કરતા હોય નવું જ્યારે કોન્સેપ્ટ, તો એ કારીગર કયા કારીગર સાથે કામ કર્યું છે, તો કારીગરનું ઘર, એમના અમુક વિડિયાસ છે, ફોટોસ છે, કે કેવી રીતે એનું આખું પ્રોસેસ છે વિવિંગનું, કે કેમ એ લોકોએ કામ કર્યું છે. તો આમાં શું છે કે બંનેને ફાયદો થાય, આર્ટિઝનને પણ ફાયદો થાય અને કસ્ટમર પણ સમજી શકે કે અમે જે કામ લઈએ છીએ એક કારીગરનું કામ છે, ને કારીગર કેવી રીતે એમાં એમનું એફર્ટ જે છે ઇમોશનલ છે નાખે છે, અને બંને જે છે એ હળી મળીને કામ કરે છે. તો એવું અમે ઈચ્છીએ છીએ કે પૂરું એનું ક્રેડિટ મળે અને પ્રોસેસ કસ્ટમર સુધી પણ એની પ્રોસેસ જાય, અને કસ્ટમર પણ સમજી શકે કે એનું વેલ્યુ શું છે. કારણ કે આપણે લક્ઝરીની વાત કરીએ છીએ તો એનું વેલ્યુ પણ વધવું જોઈએ કે વેલ્યુ શું છે, જે મશીનમાં બને છે ને એક હાથથી બને છે તો એનું શું વેલ્યુ છે, પૂરું ફેમિલી એમાં કેવી રીતે કામ કરે છે, એ એક તો છે અમારો અપેક્ષા.
There need to be two different markets because craft cannot be mass produced, nor should it be mass produced. So artisans can work with designers in both of those markets. The main one though being the luxury market, the small limited edition market where artisans are actually producing, and that along with credit, it should be visualized. You should be able to see what are all the processes to understand that small production. I'm really translating roughly because I didn't know I would have to translate, but દાયભાઈ એવું છે બરાબર કીધું કે નહીં?
હાજી, હા બરોબર છે, કારણ કે આ પ્રશ્ન ત્યારે થાય છે કે જ્યારે એક ડિઝાઇન બનીને માસ પ્રોડક્શનમાં જાય છે જે ક્રાફ્ટમાં એટલા સમય માટે શક્ય નથી, એટલે બધા પ્રોબ્લેમ ક્રિએટ થાય છે. તો આ પ્રોબ્લેમ ન થાય અને આપણને સાથે કામ તો કરવું જ છે, તો બે માર્કેટ હોવું જોઈએ. લક્ઝરી માર્કેટ છે ક્રાફ્ટ સાથે કરવું જોઈએ ને ક્રાફ્ટને પૂરો ક્રેડિટ મળે, અને જો માર્ક્સ પ્રોડક્શન પર જો જવું છે તો પછી એની અલગ માર્કેટ શોધે. તો આ જે ટકરાવ છે જે આપણી વચ્ચે જે એક મતભેદ થાય છે તો એ મારા હિસાબે ન થાય, મારું એવું માનવું છે.
He says he thinks one of the problems is when you try to do the mass production, because then the artisan can't be involved. So I think there still could be more discussion on, suppose a designer or a design house wants to do mass production, then how could I think, how could the artisan be compensated, be acknowledged and compensated for that? But in the production of the smaller limited edition luxury market, then there can be much more equal collaboration.
Yeah, I think there's some nice solutions coming in the chat, Judy.
I can't read and talk and listen at the same time.
So
કારણ કે
basically saying
જ્યારે
that
કલેક્શન અને જ્યારે એ કલેક્શન લોન્ચ કરે ત્યારે કારણ કે આર્ટિઝનનું જે છે એ પૂરી પ્રોસેસ બતાવે કે કેવી રીતે બને છે, તો કસ્ટમરને પણ એક જે વિશ્વાસ છે એ બેસી જાય અને એને પણ લાગે કે હું કારીગર પાસેથી લઉં છું ને કારીગર અને બંનેનું પ્રો ક્રિએશન છે, બંનેનું 50-50% બંનેને ક્રેડિટ મળે મારા હિસાબે.
Yeah, he said 50-50, it should be 50-50 credit, and when the product is launched, information about how it's produced should also be accessible. And I think that adds to the value for the consumer.
Yes.
No?
Absolutely. Transparency is something that that when I do workshops with founders of artisan organizations, I really encourage the differential that they can make in the marketplace is absolutely through transparency. And part of that is making the labor and the artisan and craftsmanship very visible. And a key part, let's say, of what's being made. I so appreciate this call for needing, we should not assume that it can all be one market. This notion of two different markets, one of them perhaps what is positioned as luxury, another one around mass production. I think that's a really wonderful invitation. So thank you, Dayalal and Dilip, and thank you.
Can I
Judy,
add one more thing?
Absolutely,
I wanted
Judy.
to go back to what Karthik said in the very beginning, that when you're working in a craft, it's not the same process where you design and you produce. It's integrated. And like he was saying that, you know, it comes out, maybe comes out differently when it's produced. So the artisan has much more input than simply producing, because they are adding to the design. And that's what we have been trying to do in our education. And I think Dayabai knows it very well, that there's and that has to be acknowledged, because that in this world has more value than simply the labor.
Yeah.
And-
So we
and
are,
actually,
we're about to run out of time. Welcome additional questions in the chat. We will continue this conversation on the Deed Lab's Instagram. So please also make sure to watch that space to continue this dialogue. If you have if you leave with unanswered questions, also you can add them there. And Karthik, I'll turn it to you. I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Judy said, is that, you know, I can only talk from my experience, and I have to, I mean, I just want to say at this time, I know some people are offended when I use the word WhatsApp, but Cynthia, it is a reality. It is a reality. WhatsApp has been a great tool for artisans to sell their wares during COVID, and it's amazing how they have become WhatsApp friendly. But it has also, from the other end, I often see a lot of designers, youngsters, because when I work with a lot of youngsters who want to come in, they often feel that once you send a design drawing on WhatsApp, the artisan is going to understand and replicate it, which is not often the case. And what I try and encourage is to be more organic and go and sit with the artisans and work with them, rather than expecting them to create a design which has been sent on WhatsApp. I mean, in my experience, I have found it to be far more evolving and richer. And it's a lot of hard work, which often, I mean, I know some fantastic designers who have been champions of craft, but I've also seen designers who wanted to take the easy way out and think that they don't seem to understand, I've sent a drawing and why is the finished product not looking like the drawing, you know, and that is very often the case. So I just feel that the reality is that there is no easy way out in crafts. It's hard work at both the producer level and the designer level, and both have to be integral to the process.
You want to share some of the specifics about the case of plagiarism that you all experienced? How would you perhaps connect some of what we've discussed today with that particular experience that you had to go through?
In my case?
Yeah.
So in my case, if you walk into our store in Bangalore, you would see pictures of all our artisans who are working. You would see videos of our artisans with their names. You would see them talking about the products they've created. Recently, for a very big festival, 5 women artisans approached me saying they wanted additional income. And we actually created products which were named after the artisans. And we did fantastic, considering it was a limited period of time, and we raised funds for them. But Cynthia, it's also backfired for me, because I've also had very, very established, educated designers from some of the premier institutes approach these artisans with printouts of our work and ask them to do it for them, and where they have also said that we would pay you more. But I think having worked for 10 years with my family of artisans, they are also now learning to push back and say, hey, listen, we will not replicate or plagiarize another design, but if you have an idea, we will create it for you. And that's what I encourage them to do, Cynthia, because I feel, I mean, coming from a management background, business ethics is a huge part of management studies. And since I also work in the corporate sector, I know how, and I've also worked in music, where IP and copyright issues have been huge, where you can't just take music and use it in your, you know, there are copyright issues involved. So what I always encourage the artisans is to tell them that, listen, you will not do anything unethically. Because if you're going to do something for a quick buck, then can I trust you when you say you're going to be using natural colors? Are you going to be using seasoned wood? Because that idea of being unethical then percolates in every other field that you work in the craft, especially when I'm creating toys for young kids. I have to ensure that the colors that are being used are natural, they are being seasoned without any chemicals. So I feel that your ethical value systems has to translate in your work at every level. And that is the simple logic that I follow, is that if you're going to fall prey to saying, I want to make a quick buck and compensate on your ethical values, then you may end up compensating that in other areas as well. And that for me decides if an artisan is ethical enough for me to work with. That's my point of view.
Thank you. We have time for one more question from the audience. If anyone may have it. I've been trying to, there's some questions there around royalties, old designs, local, original, ancestral. I think Monica has provided some interesting resources there. Zara, I see your hand raised. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I had a question about if you guys have any examples or any thoughts on different countries in South Asia working together to produce work. And also, like, if you could expand on other countries, if you have that information, or maybe you could lead me to resources on maybe how artisans function differently in Pakistan, for example, because I see like a lot of new things coming out of there, and I'm not sure about how to judge whether they're sustainable or not, because you can go on their website and see that they claim to be, or like see images of artisans, but there's like, I feel like I maybe don't have the experience to be able to judge correctly about that.
I don't have specifics. I would, maybe Priya also has some resources for us. I definitely encourage you as a starting point to develop your own definition of sustainability. We use the word, we see the words sustainable, ethical, being used interchangeably. And so I absolutely encourage that as a starting point. If anyone has any resources specifically for Zara, please feel free to share them in the chat. I'll ask Anjali and Maria Luisa, and we'll end with these two questions. Anjali? Or Anjali?
Hi, this is Anjali here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I have a question for Karthik. I'm so sorry. My question to Karthik is, when you own a shop, you said you own a shop in Bangalore, right?
Yes.
You work directly with artisans, basically, right? But the ownership of that shop is yours, right?
Yes.
Right. So when you give credit, when you are talking about the credit giving thing, right? They are not the part owners, or you have not given a share to the artisans, basically. You have given a name to your company. So
Yes.
what I felt, you very much emphasized on the fact, because I've worked very closely with artisans, because I had 20 centers running of my own of chicken curry. Lucknow chicken curry is very famous. Okay. So after it being made, and I was working with at a designer level. Okay. So I know, I even used to intervene in their fights over a cup of tea. If somebody dropped a cup of tea, that is the level of involvement I had with them. Okay. So, Parsons made it possible for me after doing this course, that I can now understand the values of it. I can add more to the artisans, like I can empower them more, basically. What I have done is I've made them a part of it. I am trying to make documentaries with them. I'm trying to bring them forward so that they are known to the world, that, and I'm like giving the credit also to those artisans who are producing it. So you have given it a place, a credit. I'm trying to give credit to the people. So you placed it very, WhatsApp only help, and WhatsApp work only helped during the time of COVID because traveling was not made easy. In India, most of these state boundaries were banned from entering. So that's why this WhatsApp culture of designing came into fact, basically. Otherwise, there is no way any designer can work, without getting fully involved into the design. They cannot work on WhatsApp, like I feel that without being directly involved with the artisan, you cannot work directly. Without a direct involvement, there cannot be anything produced,
Anjali,
So
I'm just watching time, and I want to be respectful of our everyone's
so-
time. Do you have a question there for Karthik?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, why are you so like, we can have a positive outlook towards this designer and a collaboration between designer and artisan instead of having a negative view about it. Basically, I just wanted to say, why is this being taken as a negative?
Yeah, there was one comment about the WhatsApp designer, but absolutely it shouldn't be construed as a generalization. I am a design educator. I feel a sense of responsibility to press on and make sure that all designers are committed to these very important questions and to the very careful and slow models like the ones that you're describing. Those do not jive with the expectations of mass production that Dilip and Dayal were calling out. So there's that rub there, and we have to continue to insist on it. But absolutely, it doesn't mean that everyone is in that same space. So thank you for your comments. And we're going to end with a question from Maria Luisa.
Thank you. Hello, I'm here in Colombia. Hello to everybody. Lovely to meet you all around the world. In Colombia, we have been working collaborations between designers and artisans for the past 15 years, like in a regular basis. And we've been, as you were saying before, we've been giving them a place, a name, a name to the work. Let's say if we are making let's say we're making something like this. This was made by somebody that lives in Guinea. Her name is this and that, But still, I still find, and I would like to know if you are implementing any kind of process in shortening the supply chain, but let's say the artisans always, since they're in the first part of the supply chain, their income is very low compared to when the product gets to the customer, It passes through many stages, right? So I have been thinking in the past year of how can we try to share that profit that is earned in the last part of the supply chain. How can we transfer that profit to the first part of the supply chain? Because naming them, fantastic, but they are still not getting out of poverty, So I've been putting this question out. I've been putting it out and putting it out because I think that we could collaboratively, we could together think about a way to do this. In accounts, the people in accounts and accountability and paying taxes and all those things, when I mention this thing, they say, oh no, that's too difficult. We will have to change the law and we have to change this and that. But I think it's something that in my head needs to work, So my question is anybody here in the rest of the world implementing, getting part of the profit of the last part of the supply chain back as a royalty? I don't know how, but back to the artisans, Because I think they're the ones that hold the knowledge,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. Monica, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to add that that's a great conversation and solutions are there. So basically, I think you don't need to wait for anywhere else. Even if you go on our website, you find a few models. Royalties for Artisans that we did in Bagru is a model where we just changed, I mean, we defied the law. Nobody can tell us that, you know, artisans cannot create new designs. So the business model was created on artisans creating new designs. They are creatives. They have copyright over the new designs. We parcels, we make hands. That's even the logo. It's the hand of one of the artisans. We make all kind of new designs that can then be, you know, bought and the royalties go. So it's about how you design your model. There are accounting modalities to solve that. Absolutely no problem. You can have service agreements. You can have, the idea is to break out of the labor, like employer, employee, kind of the bottom down approach. It's like you telling them to do something. And that obviously requires, I know it requires a lot. I mean, we had so many conversations with different types of stakeholders in the craft ecosystem. I call it craft ecosystem. Many designers say it's difficult. There's not, you know, quality consistency. There's, you know, delays in delivering. There are so many things that have to be discussed on each section of the supply chain. But solutions are there, and models need to be tested. And obviously, for those models to be tested, there are risks. But I think there are people who have a lot of money and could support this kind of cultural entrepreneurship and social innovation in the craft system. We just need to kind of join forces together and be a voice for that. You know, now at the Conference of Parties 26, where we talk about climate change, there should be a group of us that represents the craft ecosystems and says, hey, we know how to reduce pollution. We know how to create a sustainable fashion industry. Let's join forces.
Here, here. Thank you. Mira and Karthik,
Thank you.
words, responses to Maria Luisa or other comments?
No, I mean, absolutely. I think Maria, thank you, Maria, for bringing up this, you know, this point. It's like the single most important point. And just very quickly, I just want to share with the group, Daiba and I recently were in a workshop where we did an exercise where we mapped, you know, the whole movement of people who were engaging with craft since 1950 in India to 2021. And as we were mapping, you know, the different stakeholders, what became very evident is that everywhere stakeholders in the craft ecosystem had increased, whether they were buyers, exporters, designers, e-commerce markets, consumers, you know, people wanting everything, everybody had increased. The only segment that had gone down, the only people who had gone down were the artisans. And the reason they had gone down was because they're not earning enough. They just don't see a future for it for their children. So unless that part is fixed, you know, it's going to be very difficult to, I mean, we'll have to look for craft somewhere else, not maybe in the traditional space.
Thank you, Mira. And Karthik?
Yeah, you know, I think
you.
Mira was bang on in saying that even in Chandpatna, our biggest issue right now is we're finding it very difficult for a lot of artisans to come in and train, because it's a lot of hard work, and you're not always sure that you would get the right price, you know, even with our artisans, even though we pay them the prices that they ask for. But I think, I mean, I know time is short, so I'll make this very quick. I think you really can't generalize a model in craft in India because we are so diverse. I must tell you, artisans in the South are very different in terms of our temperament. In Karnataka, I come from Bombay, where everybody is running for time. In the South, in Karnataka, my artisans at 6 p.m., they will not work. If I were to work with an artisan in Gujarat, if there's additional money to be made, they will sometimes put in the extra hours, as I've seen. But in Karnataka, they would rather say, I don't want that extra money. I would rather go home and spend time with my family, you know? So that's a struggle when we have deadlines for exports or for other buyers. We often are answerable to timelines. In Karnataka, the artisans will not pick up your phone. They will just shut it. They will not respond. But we have to be responsive. So for us, every model has to be different. The other thing that I have struggled with when I started, I wanted to try and form a cooperative. But the artisans in Chandpatna did not want to be a cooperative because there is always a lot of little tension between the various artisan units as to who is getting more work or the other. So they don't want to always collaborate with each other. There is politics in craft as well. So which is why we didn't have a choice but to create a store, because in India, most of the artisans make their money during the exhibitions. So there are 5 months in a row where all the artisans or the vendors would be going back to back in one exhibition to make income. Now we realized that was not a sustainable model, which we needed a place where people could regularly buy so that we could give them regular income. And I think we proved our point with COVID, because throughout COVID, we were able to sustain the artisans because we had a storefront. So every business is different. There's no one way to generalize it. I think we need to appreciate the diversity with which we work. I mean, that's what I would say.
That sounds like a great way to end this. Let me invite Priya here to join us for any parting words. This has been amazing. This is the beginning of the study group. We hope you will join us the next 2 Fridays. If you're in the United States, we have a time change, so it will be 1 hour earlier. The theme next Friday is New Rules of Entrepreneurship. And the third and final session of the study group will be focused on the core of business of handmade around the new formal. Priya, anything you would like to add?
I think we've already gone way above time, but this has been such an exciting discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you, Meera, Monica, Dayabhai, Karthik, Judy Frater, who has been a huge inspiration for our work and also one of the experts that we spoke with. Thank you so much. Please do take a look at businessofhandmade.com. I would agree to Karthik that there is no one size fits all. We have tried to represent different kinds of approaches and models, and they're different when, in each and every part of the country. So please do not go in this conversation thinking that you have all the answers, because honestly, with each community, you have to find your own answers. But thank you, and I hope many of you will join us for the next session next Friday. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for doing this.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists, to Judy also for stepping in, and thank you all for the wonderful, wonderful questions and your engagement with this very important topic. Bye.